Uber. Uber accidentally proves the wage gap doesn't exist. I like this. This was kind of an interesting story because Uber really has nothing to do with men, women, managers, nothing to do with the workplace. This is people signing in, making money, getting tips, driving, signing out, getting paid. So it's completely neutral when it comes to that. And Uber kind of proves it here. This is coming from empathygap.uk. Shock, the pay gap is Uber bullshit. They say, okay, you already know the gender pay gap was bullshit. Perhaps you're with Jordan Peterson and go to the multivariate analysis route. Or perhaps, like Warren Farrell, you prefer to dissect in detail the specific factors which show just how apparent the gender pay gap arises. Or perhaps you just know that the gender hourly pay gap rate for people working under 40 full-time in the UK is essentially zero. Or perhaps you prefer to observe that if women were paid less for the same job, companies would simply employ men, or simply...
English, motherfucker, do you speak it?
Or perhaps you prefer to observe that if women were paid less for the same job, companies simply wouldn't employ men. They'd hire women because they're cheaper. Take your pick. But here's a very neat study that I think can say bangs the very last nail in the coffin, or the very last nail into the coffin lid. It's a study based on Uber drivers in the USA. The great thing about this study is that the Uber algorithm is totally and indisputably gender blind. The computer just records time of journey, length of journey, time of day, etc. What the driver gets paid cannot depend on male versus female. Now, I have to apologize if I'm screwing up words. I've live streamed for a couple hours today, and now I'm an hour and a half into my long segment, of which you're seeing probably part of. So if I screw up a few words, I apologize. So they say, you're ahead of me, aren't you? Yep, men get paid 7% more per hour. The study was able to identify the reasons. It's made up of 3 parts. 20% of the pay gap is due to what trips or routes the driver opts for. Some tend to be more lucrative than others. For example, trips to an airport are good payers. Men tend to optimize on more lucrative routes. So they plan it out. And men look at this more aggressively than women do, and they say, how can I make the most out of this? How can I get paid the most for my time? 20% of that gap is just from that. 30% of the pay gap is experience. Uber drivers have a high turnover rate, but higher for women. So men gain more experience from having done the job longer. This is important because it takes experience to learn what routes, times, etc. pay best. The evidence that is both sexes learn at the same rate, but men stick at it longer, so end up more canny. The remaining 50% of that gap is, wait for it, men do more work per hour. The data shows that by driving just a couple of percentage points faster on average, men fit in more trips per hour. Done and sorted. In summary, men stick at the job longer, gain more experience, and are more canny, focused on the money, and do more work per hour. Sound familiar? Now, what I think is interesting about this and why I wanted to talk about this specifically is because based on all the studies, the one that they referenced that Jordan Peterson was talking about and the other studies, they find there's about a 5 to 8% or 5 to 10% gap when it comes to pay, men still making more. And some women have said, oh, but it's still proof of. But it's not. Because really what it boiled down to in the end, that 5 to 10% difference, was men being more aggressive and more assertive when it came to asking for either initial starting salary or a raise. Once that was factored in, all other factors taken out, men and women were paid equally. The same thing, and this was, I did a gap story on this a year and a half, 2 years ago now, and it was from a union that was for either bus drivers or train drivers, some transit system. They had to hire X amount of women and X amount of men. They had to get the same starting salary. When they got a raise, they got a percentage bump, and the raise wasn't based on merit. It was based on time in job. So obviously there was literally no difference in any portion of it. Men and women were hired at the same rates, promoted at the same rates based on years in job. They were given the same raise dollar amount, and they were raised the same levels. So everything was completely equal when it came to that. And when they analyzed it at the end of the year, I don't remember the percentage now, but men made a decent amount more than the women. How could this be? Because men elected night shifts that were a little bit more risky. They kept them away from their families, but they paid more. Now, women could also do those night shifts, and that would have evened it out, but they chose not to. They chose the family-friendlier times. That was men's decision. Number 2, men worked weekends. Also, men took them away from their families, but they made more money. So they were willing to sacrifice time with the family to make more money. Reason number 3, men took more overtime shifts. Men took more holiday pay. Why? Because men will sacrifice that for more money, whether it's to take care of them, their families, or themselves. And a good example of that is this. When I was in the military, I was doing law enforcement work. We had to work across holidays. We had to work across Christmas and New Year's and all this other stuff. A lot of us single guys would say to the married guys, we'll switch shifts with you. And so the married guys would take time off at Christmas to be with their families. And we would, work the Christmas shifts because we were single. Like, we didn't have a family to visit with. We didn't have kids or a wife. So that way the guys could be with their family. Then during New Year's, just a week later, the married guys would take our shifts. So we could go out and party it up and be with the girls in the clubs and have a good time. And the married guys, because, they got a wife at home and they didn't really celebrate the new year, they would work that shift. Well, men are flexible. Men are willing to kind of give and take a little bit. And what men and guys like this will do is they'll say, I will give up the family time because my wife is home with the kids, or because my wife is home cooking dinner, or because I am the bread earner, but they still have a good parent at home. I will give that up because I love my family, but I love my family in a different way. I'll give them more money. Maybe it's better retirement. Maybe it's more money for the kids. Maybe I can get them a new pair of sneakers. Maybe I can send them off to soccer practice or whatever. Where the women most likely would say, I'd rather have the time off to spend with my family. Maybe they had a husband that would take that work. And they also found that this gap comes because when they did the averages, all women versus all men in all jobs, what they found is a lot of women, once they get married, they leave the workforce to become stay-at-home moms, or even just go back to being part-time. Or as they aged, a lot of times they'd burn out of the very high-paying, challenging job, and they'd step down to something that was a little easier on their schedule, a little easier on their old cerebellum, to be a little bit easier in life, and they could get a little bit more enjoyment out of what they do. Men, on the other hand, tend to work a tough, taxing job, maybe even stressful, that pays them a lot more money, hoping to retire. And a lot of times they end up, stroking out and dying on the job. But guys will make that sacrifice. That's the same reason why CEO are mostly men, because it's mostly men that are very, very driven and will give up family and dating and time with the kids and everything else to chase that power and that money. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a smart move, but they're usually the ones that do. And they're in it for the long haul. They'll go from CEO to CEO to CEO of many different companies if they decide to make a change and they want to change in their life, but they like that challenge. Most women don't, because it's just, again, it's a little bit of hardwiring. Guys, the censorship is in full force, whether it's Twitter removing certain presidents or other people, whether it's Facebook that is removing now the trucker convoy and other pages that are trying to set up events, whether it's here on YouTube. YouTube's dying. Like any unique, interesting content that goes against the narrative is being removed. Number one place where all my content is going to go is locals, and everything is getting mirrored over to Rumble. YouTube is going to be the kind of the same old for me. I can't do many new topics. I can't talk about certain things, and YouTube just won't allow it anymore. So YouTube is going to be the least of my content. I'll still put it up here when I can. But going forward, if you want to find all my content and all the stuff that probably really matters in society today, join me over on Rumble. Join me over on betterbachelor.locals.com, where you can support me for 13 cents a day. You can take part in the forums completely 100% free speech forums because I am the moderator over there. I'm the only moderator, and I don't moderate. I pretty much let anybody talk about anything, including things that the community may not like, because sunshine is the best disinfectant.